Yeah, that's right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Y'all let me know if the sound levels are okay. It sounds good. Okay, thank you. So my name is Damon Small. Some of you might know me as Chef. If you've ever seen me before, that's my DEF CON handle. And anyway, I'm going to talk about, well, you can see my title there, The Whole is More Dangerous Than the Sum of Its Parts. And let's just get right into it. Oh, and I'm aware, I think lunch is happening right after this, right? So I'm hungry too, so I'll try to be brief. So, as I said, 30 years of IT and InfoSec. I've been in Houston that entire time, so a lot of oil and gas, a lot of healthcare. Also did some work at Johnson Space Center, and I've been a consultant for about 15 years now, I think, and just remember, you cannot spell consultant without C-O-N. No? Okay, all right. I've been involved with DEF CON for about 10 years as a speaker. I've spoken there several times. I've been a shepherd with the Wall of Sheep and the Packet Hacking Village, and this year was my first year as a goon that I have proudly here. So, yeah, that was a lot of work, but a lot of fun. If you haven't been to DEF CON, I encourage you to go. It's a wonderful community, and we always have a lot of fun. I grew up in Louisiana. Go Tigers! Any LSU fans? All right. Good. Got into tech while I was studying music at LSU, and I thought that the technology was more interesting than the music I was recording, so that's how I got into that. And yeah, Hurricane Beryl was rough. Good to see you, man. And anyway, so special thanks to HoustonCon. As I've been involved with DEF CON, as I mentioned, I know how much work goes into putting on a show like this. It's a labor of love for Mike Farnham and the staff and the rest of the volunteers, so thank you. Doggone it, I keep accidentally, sorry about that. My wife and editor, thank you, honey. She's back there. Why does it keep doing this? Her job is to take out all the stupid jokes, and then I put them back in. Yeah, so. Here's what I'm going to talk about. I am going to discuss a complex attack chain scenario that happened on a job I was on. This was several years ago, and I'm not going to talk. It keeps advancing. Is that me or? Oh, I bet I am. All right, I'll try to not do that. Anyway, I'm not going to talk a ton about the actual exploits themselves. I'm just going to talk about what level of access it gave us through each of the 9 steps. So if you're interested in hearing about the specific exploits, sorry to disappoint you, but as we step through each of the 9 steps, you'll see how each was necessary for the... Okay, I'm not even holding it now. All right. So we're going to focus on the steps and the level of access each step gave us. All right, who's trolling me? Okay, thanks, dude. All right. So yes, when you go on first, I'm beta testing this entire conference. So, oh, no. All right. Yeah. Actually, one of my buddies did tell me that. He said I should have brought my flipper so I could mess with your device. All right, no problem. So I wrote this content. You think I would remember what I was supposed to say? We had 8 consultants on this engagement. It was 85 billable days. So with 8 of us, it took a while to get through it. And there was a lot of, what's up, man? Yes. Okay, here we go. We good? Maybe, yeah. Let's see. All All right, already talked about that. Uh-oh. Okay, 85-day gig. There was one blue teamer, 3 red teamers, an architect, and a wireless guy. Domain administrator is often the goal that we go for, but that's not the only indicator of success on this type of engagement, and it's not the only valuable part to the client. And we'll talk more about that, those details in a minute. One thing I learned on that is a lot of us in this industry focus way too much on the individual attacks rather than the systemic issues that existed to allow the attacks to take place. The result of this engagement, after we did the readout and delivered the report and everything, sorry, one second. It's doing it again. The client told us it was going to take them 3 years to fix all the problems that we had identified. Yeah, it's still doing it, man. Keep fighting with this thing. And the message is, as I say at that bottom bullet point, breaking is fast, fixing is slow. So whether you're offense or defense in your day job, I tell my clients this all the time. As a red teamer, my job is easier than the job of protecting the environment and fixing the problems as they come up. So this... Oh, right. Oh, okay. All right, cool. Yeah, next slide, please. Does the laser still work? All right, I appreciate that this is a dense graphic here, and it's difficult to read. Don't worry about it. All this text here is not really relevant. I'll talk us through it, but as I said, it was 9 steps, starting up there and going down there. And so let's talk through how my team of 8 people eventually became domain admin. Next slide. Hang on, let me put this down. This is like a fidget spinner now. It's going to distract me. The first step was we enumerated the network, right? That's the first thing you typically do, is you start scanning all the things and figuring out what is on the client's network. So we did that. Is anybody into software development here? If you use Jenkins, okay. If you've used Jenkins, you're probably familiar with it, and the default configuration allows you to run scripts for troubleshooting and diagnostics and those sorts of things. Well, unfortunately, as you can see, that command that we put in there, you can also do fun things like spawning a shell, which we did. And so that gave us system-level access on the device that was running Jenkins. So we already had somewhat of a foothold in this client's network. Next slide, please. Now, you see the arrow there. Moving on to step 2, we found a file server. Next. And the file server, in fact, all servers in this client's environment were protected by Cylance. And it does a really good job of protecting devices on which it runs, including stopping you from running tools like Mimikatz, which, if you're familiar with it, Mimikatz will examine system memory, and if there's cached credentials in memory, you can extract those and use them to do nefarious things. Cylance is really good at doing that, except when you introduce human error. I had to obfuscate a lot of information on here, as you can see, but there was one device, the file server that we found, had an out-of-date policy in place such that we were able to run Mimikatz because the configuration was incorrect. So from the first device, where we had system-level access, we were able to pivot over to this file server and figure out that it was misconfigured, and so we extracted some credentials from that device. Next, please. All right, now this third one's a little weird because step 3 required us to compromise 2 different devices to allow us to get on to move on to step 6. So let's see what we do there. Next slide, please. So there's a bunch of different configurations and operating systems. Some of the servers were not online, but we achieved remote code execution on nearly 7,000 devices, as you can see there, by scanning every available host for SMB, TCP port 445. We used mass-scan, but any tool that will enumerate network services will work. Mass-scan was pretty fast. Oh, I should tell you this as a sidebar. This is a very large organization with a very large network, and they were kind enough to give us access to the monitoring tools for their core routers and switches. So if you're familiar with mass-scan, it will fling packets very, very quickly. And you can throttle it to send as many packets as you want to. So we didn't want to take down the client's network. If you're in consulting, you know that's a bad thing to do. You don't generally get hired after you tear down their network. So we were monitoring the network performance, and we slowly increased the number of packets that we were sending until we saw a 10% increase in the CPU utilization of the routers. And I got nervous after that. I was the team lead for this, and I was like, I don't know when they're going to notice, but I don't want to take down their core infrastructure because that would be a bad day. So, but we did. We were able to enumerate a lot of stuff very, very quickly. And I want to say, good Lord, they gave us 5 or 6 Class A networks to scan. I mean, it was a lot of IP addresses, right? So we did that, and of the 7,000 devices that we found online, we used that command there. Again, I'm not going to go into the technical details because I'll confuse myself, and that's not the point of this story anyway. We gathered 1,500 unique plain text credentials. So again, step 1 is we had system level access. Then we got a set of credentials from the file server, and in here we got 1,500 plain text domain creds. So we're slowly chipping away at this environment. Next slide, please. So once all that happened, then we moved down to Tanium server that they had. Next slide. And, oh, yeah. So Tanium, if you're not familiar with it, it's a tool that will allow you to catalog information about your environment, including what servers do, who isn't responsible for administering them, who has access to it. So there's a wealth of information there. And using one set of domain creds, we were able to log and authenticate to the Tanium service and get information. So you can see the query that one of my teammates used was get logged in users containing, and I had to obfuscate that because you'd figure out who the client was. But basically, we were looking for everybody that had privileged accounts, not just domain users, but privileged accounts. So that was a finding because we're like, wow, does the entire bloody organization need to have access to all that information? So after we issued that query, we found a domain admin's user account, and I had to obfuscate that as well. And so we thought, okay, now that's not the administrative account, but we know who the domain admins are. Excuse me. And we know what at least one user account was. So we thought, okay, we know who the user is. If we can get access to that device, maybe we can pivot from his user account to his administrative account. And so that's what we sought to do. Next slide, please. So in step 7 here, we found that user's workstation. And we thought, okay, if we can get access to that workstation, then maybe, like I said, we can pivot. So on the next slide, this is one of my favorites. So using PSExec and Meterpreter, we got a reverse shell into the domain admin's, I said personal workstation. It belonged to the client, but he wasn't using it for administrative tasks. This is a screenshot of some files that we found in the documents folder. Ladies and gentlemen, if you store plain text creds, do not name it credentials admin user. Don't mind if I do. So we snatched that up quickly. And yeah, it was a CSV. And so we was like, all right, that user, we had all of his administrative passwords to every device that this user was responsible for. So number one, don't store creds in the clear. And number two, if you do, at least give it a clever username. So that was a fun day. We're like, all right, we've got this. So moving on to the next slide. All right, we're getting close to the end. I must be hungrier than y'all are because this is going quick, but it's fine. Using those credentials, a lot of this client's environment was virtualized. And so we had access to their entire virtual server farm. So again, using those creds, we logged into that. And on the next slide, we use that to authenticate to an account. Oh yeah, I can't show you what the command line was because again, it would give away who the client was. But we created our own user. Oh, thank you. We created our own user and then gave it administrative privileges. Go to the next slide. I promise I wrote, oh, okay, I did put this one in here, okay. Using the privileges we had in the virtual server farm, I can say it was AWS, we created a new domain controller. We had access to one of their other domain controllers, so we snapshotted the drive, copied it over to the new server that we created, and used that command to basically crack hashes for the users in Active Directory. The hilarious thing about that, forgive me, I need some more water. Shit, can you open that for me? Yep. You're a nice guy. The hilarious thing about that, remember a couple slides ago I said that we used one of the systems that the client was using to identify who the domain administrators were, and now we were using their own AWS server to crack their hashes from the domain controller that we stole the volume from. And that's expensive if you know AWS, so the client was having to pay for us to crack their hashes, which I got a kick out of. They were not pleased, but they learned a very valuable lesson. So yeah, including domain administrator hashes, as well as the Kerberos ticket granting ticket account hash. So we were getting really close at that point to owning the entire place. Next slide, please. And finally, after we stole their domain controller and cracked those hashes, we became a domain admin. And if you go to the next slide, I want to say this was the third to last day of the engagement, and we finally, oh no, that's the next slide. Oh yeah, so we created, we created our new user, added ourselves to the domain administrator group, and it's not shown on here, but we weren't even trying to be sneaky. We gave the new domain admin we created some obnoxious name like, you know, Hack the World. I mean, it was very obviously not a normal account. Next slide. Yeah, so this is anybody else in here in consulting? Are there consultants here? Yeah, okay. So it's not, you shouldn't celebrate. I mean, you're always happy when you get domain admin, right? But you got to be cool in front of the client. But the client was in another room, like they couldn't see or hear us. And so we looked around to make sure the client could hear us. No. And so we did jump up and down and say, we got it. Because like I said, it was an 85-day gig. So we had been on site with this client for about a month with multiple clients. So here it is. We added ourselves to the domain. Now, for those of you that are not consultants, and if you work in defense on the blue team, you know you should probably monitor the domain admin group, right? If anybody adds or removes something, you want to know about that. Next slide, please. So during the readout, and you know, it's a lot of people in there. It was a big team. Consultants are on one side, the client's sitting on the other. And I made a comment that, well, we added ourselves to domain admin. 2 days later, when the engagement was done, the the account was still there. Like, that's weird. That account is still there. They didn't notice. So we're doing the readout, and, you know, consultants get paid to say really smart things. So I was like, you know, you should monitor your domain admins group. And the particular person that was responsible for that was sitting across the table like this. All right, for those of you that are good at reading a room, when your client is sitting there like this, that's not generally a good sign. And he said, we do have a system to monitor domain admins. It's like, that account's been there for 3 days. What happened? The system went down and no one noticed. Sorry, say again? It's like, yeah. The system was down. It was like, oh, all right, so you need a monitoring system for the monitoring system, I guess is the lesson. So I've stepped through all of the events that happened on the technology side, how we pivoted from system-level access eventually down to domain admin. But some of the lessons that we made sure to emphasize to this client was on the blue team side, we were monitoring the routers and switches, like I said, right? And we increased CPU utilization on their core infrastructure by 10%, and they didn't notice. That's something, if you see a change in behavior of your core infrastructure, you should check that out. That's the first clue that they missed. Configuration management. A lot of developers like to have their own instance of Jenkins, which is fine, but the default config will allow those remote scripts to be run, as I demonstrated earlier. So be careful you understand the tools that anybody in the IT shop is using. If there's a configuration issue like that, be aware of it. It's a pretty well-known vulnerability with Jenkins, and this is an otherwise very sophisticated client, but they missed that one. The technical control, Silence, that was supposed to prevent memory scraping was not configured consistently. And honestly, we kind of got lucky when we found that. I mean, that was a bit of a needle in a haystack thing. But we did find it, and we were able to take advantage of it. Policy and procedure, password reuse allowed us to steal credentials and use them to gain access to other things. The privileged credentials stored in clear text. And by the way, I don't know how your organizations are, but we were so alarmed by that finding, the clear text credentials, we kind of stopped what we were doing and we went and told the boss, the manager that we were working for, and was like, hey, we found this file. And he got really red in the face and jumped up and stormed off. And I'm like, ooh, I hope I didn't ruin that guy's day. rogue DA account was not deleted even after the client was notified. Again, that was, I don't want to say it was funny. I don't get joy out of wrecking someone's network, but the fact that that rogue DA account stayed there as long as it did was, I thought it was funny. Our reconnaissance included using their own management tools. It's okay to have those tools, but every domain user account had access to it. So if you have tools with a lot of sensitive information in it, make sure only the people that need access to that data have access to that data. And yeah, the domain admin account was created but not detected for several days. The reason I put that list of stuff up there, at any point along the way, if one of those techniques that we used had the appropriate technical controls in place, we would have stopped in our tracks. We got lucky in some cases by finding the misconfigured things and whatnot. The thing you have to remember, as consultants, we could have been stopped many, many times, but we weren't. In the real world, your actual adversary is not limited like we were to 85 billable days. Your adversary could get a foothold and keep their pounding on it for as long as it takes until they get what they're looking for. What could the client have done differently? Well, we've talked through that. Lots of things. Yeah, yes.
What are they feeding? You're not monitoring it, PowerShell, no new services, no lateral movement.
Correct. I don't know if y'all heard that comment. Mike up here was commenting that they had a SIM, they had access to all this telemetry. We should have been caught. And I really wish I could tell you who the client was because, but I can't. It was an otherwise very sophisticated organization, but your comment is spot on. How in the hell did they miss that? I mean, we were...
101 type queries.
Buy me a beer later and I'll tell you who the client was. Huh? Oh, no. Yeah, I forgot. Okay, next slide, please. So, like I said on the outset, breaking is fast, fixing is slow. We had 8 consultants that took 85 days, billable days, to do all of that. And again, to wrap it up, the client said when their project plan was completed, they said, yeah, this is going to be a 36-month deal to unscrew all of these things. So that is my story. Comments, questions?
What do you fix first? Logging. They clearly suck.
You got to collect the data first and set up the alerts, yeah.
And then they got to feed it into the SIM, and they got to make some seriously. I mean, new service with PS exec, all right? Yeah. So new service with PS exec should have. I'm taking over his cock. You can do this to mine later. So they should have. Anybody who doesn't have a new service created for Windows, a 7045 event, catches those PS execs or anything else Metasploit might do. You've got that's a one-on-one type query. I have a cheat sheet. There's a whole series of them in Malware Archaeology. They're free. So go look at them. They're in that cheat sheet. So these guys clearly didn't read the cheat sheets because everything he talked about, lateral movement. Bob or whoever, Chef logged into more than 10 systems in an hour should be an alert. They logged into 1,500 and PowerShell NOP. You should be triggering on everything PowerShell. So clearly they weren't monitoring PowerShell. That's just 3. All those are on my cheat sheets. That's security 101. I'm just telling you.
There's only 30 minutes left. Oh, you're done? Okay. But no, that's a very good comment. Yeah, what do you fix first? And yeah, if you don't have the telemetry, you're not going to be able to detect that sort of malicious activity. Yes? Oh, that should, yeah, there's no way that's a legitimate type of activity. You're spot on. And we were You have
Like
something else?
no
Yeah, I got
lull
s- I
bins,
got something else.
no.
Damon and I
shelver-
used to work together for a former consultancy, so we know.
Work, yeah, work might be a strong word.
Okay.
You guys agree?
So we find these flaws all the time. We call them the 3 C's: configuration, coverage, and completeness. Configuration is what we're talking about, not just logging, that was a fail, but the configuration, the endpoints. I've investigated hundreds of clients. Almost every one of them, I find a flaw in configuration with security tools. And coverages, they're not everywhere. So the client says, only investigate where the triggers went off. Yeah, unfortunately, you didn't install it everywhere. I can see the lateral movement went to boxes and your stuff wasn't on there, and that's where they launch the attack from. And then completeness is, do you have a process to check for it, which they failed here as well.
Yep. And we were quite surprised when we were enumerating the network and we watched the CPU utilization go that high, because this organization, their entire business model is dependent upon that network infrastructure. So I thought surely they're going to be watching the performance of that core infrastructure, right? You would think, and no. But it's on the list. Okay. Yeah, another question. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So my question is related to watching that performance. It's kind of hard to, you know, of course we want to have like some kind of homeostasis of this is our baseline configuration, but there's always the, you know, backups running, somebody running a heavy report, and it's, you know, triggering the web application and database server or something along those lines, right? Like, what do you suggest for like trying to picture those, find those anomalies in you know, CPU usage? Because a lot of times you go look, don't get me wrong, you can go look, oh, I got an alert, high CPU, you go look, and then maybe digging around, something might pop in your head. But in a very large environment, it's kind of hard to run and dive into all of these high resource alerts, if you get what I'm saying.
You are 100% correct, and in the beginning of my talk, I mentioned that I tell my clients that my job is easier than their job, and I believe that strongly. So you're not wrong, and you brought up a really good point. If you don't have that baseline of what good looks like, it will be very difficult to determine that. And unfortunately, a mature organization that's been operating for a very long time, we've got turnover in the technical staff, and you've got changes in how you're gathering the information and these sorts of things. You're right, man. It is hard to do that. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, oh, yeah, just monitor all the things, and you got it. So I don't have an answer for you other than I agree with you, and that's why, as a consultant, I make sure to not shame the client, because I started my career as a blue teamer. Well, as an IT guy first, and then a blue teamer, and I went to consulting because it just got too damn hard. You know, so you're not wrong. Do you? Okay. Oh, all right.
So there is something that I watch for.
I'm not adding you to my slide.
That's fine. That's fine. Ad hoc talk here. Well, we have time. So the points you made were correct, right? You're going to see this funny traffic, and we do see it a lot. It's usually deterministic, so you know when your backup's occurring, 2 a.m. In this case, what he was describing was, in Splunk terms, Humio's a little different, or log scale now. You can do a stats count by IP addresses from a source to a destination. If something is going across the network, like a lateral movement, the amount of IPs they're talking to is going to be highly unusual. So if you see a spike, and just say you got an alert and a spike, do you see a single IP or a couple IPs talking to a whole lot of workstations? That would be highly unusual if you have a traffic spike. So that's a way to look for it.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you. Here, have a challenge going. Give me a moment. When did this happen? This would have been 4 or 5 years ago. And so, yeah, if you notice that some of these techniques might not work now because of advances in technical controls and things, you're right. But yeah, good question. I didn't mention that 4 or 5 years ago, roughly. What else? Going once? Going twice? Thank you all for your time. Thanks, Mike, for the help. Enjoy the rest of the show.